Assalamualaikum and salam sejahtera. Today we are going to learn about kingdom Plantae. At the end of the lesson, students should be able to describe alternation of generation as the unique characteristic of kingdom Plantae and state the classification of Plantae into 4 groups. The life cycle of all plants shows alternation of generation. Gametophyte produce male and female gametes by mitosis. The egg and sperm fuse during fertilization, forming diploid zygote. Mitotic division of the zygote produce multicellular diploid sporophytes. The sporophytes produce haploid spores by meiosis. Then the spores undergo mitosis to produce a new multicellular gametophytes and the cycle begins. There are 4 groups of kingdom Plantae. The first is bryophytes. Second is pteridophytes. Third is gymnosperm. And fourth is angiosperm. Now we look at the first group of kingdom Plantae, which is the bryophytes. What students need to know is the unique characteristic of bryophytes, the classification of bryophytes into 3 phyla, and terrestrial adaptation for bryophytes. Unique characteristic of bryophytes. In bryophytes, the dominant generation is gametophyte generation. They are usually larger in size and longer living than sporophyte. Bryophytes have small sporophyte and short leaf. The sporophyte remain attached to the female gametophyte throughout the sporophyte's lifetime and depend on the gametophyte for nutrient and water. Bryophytes is non-vascular plant. This is because they lack of vascular tissues for transport of water and nutrient. They do not have true roots, stem, and leaf. Gametophytes are usually live close to water and dissolve minerals. Most of the bryophytes are grow close to the ground and supported by the rhizome. Unlike root, rhizomes lack specialized conducting cells, and rhizomes anchor the bryophyte to the substratum. Gametophytes can form gametangia, which is a multicellular structure that produce gametes and are covered by protective tissue. Female gametangium is called archegonium. Each archegonium produces one egg cell, while male gametangium is called antheridium, and each antheridium produces many sperm cells. Bryophytes need watery medium for both asexual and sexual reproduction. For example, in asexual reproduction of Marchantia species, involve dispersal of gamete from gamecope by water to grow into new thallus. In sexual reproduction, the biflagellated sperm cells need watery medium to swim to reach the egg cell in archegonium, and fertilization will occur within the archegonium. Terrestrial adaptation for bryophytes. Bryophytes has multicellular and dependent embryo which develop in archegonium for nutrient and water. For water conservation, bryophyte has waterproof cuticle to prevent the excessive loss of water by evaporation. Bryophyte has wall spores produced in sporangium. Wall spores contain sporolanin and tuff, enable the spore disperse without being dried. Presence of multicellular gametangium in bryophytes. gametangia surround and protects the gametes. And now we look at the second group of kingdom Plantae, which is the pteridophytes. At the end of the lesson, students should be able to describe the unique characteristics of pteridophytes. And second, state classification of pteridophytes into two phyla. Unique characteristic of pteridophytes. Pteridophytes are seedless plants. They have simple, lignified vascular tissue to transport water and nutrients. But the vascular tissue is not well developed. Pteridophyte has true root, stem, and leaves. Their gametophyte is small in size and free-living. The dominant generation for the pteridophyte is sporophyte because the sporophyte is large in size and long-lived. The young sporophyte depend on the gametophyte for the nutrient, while the mature sporophyte is not depend on gametophyte for nutrient because it can carry out photosynthesis. For the reproduction of pteridophytes, where the fertilization is fully depend on watery medium, the flagellated sperm cell swim through water to reach the egg cell for fertilization. There are two types of pteridophytes based on production of spores. First is homosporous pteridophyte. This pteridophyte has one type of sporangium that produces one type of spores. Examples of homosporous pteridophytes are Lycopodium species and Diropteris species. The second type of pteridophyte is heterosporous pteridophyte. This pteridophyte has two types of sporangia, which are microsporangium and megasporangium, that produce two types of spores, which are microspores and megaspores. Example of this heterosporous pteridophyte is Laginella species. Classification of pteridophytes. Pteridophytes are divided into two phyla. First, phylum Lycopodiophyta or phylum Lycophyta. The example of plant in this phylum are Lycopodium species and Laginella species. Second, phylum Pteridophyta. The example of plant is Diropteris species. The third group of kingdom Plantae is gymnosperms. At the end of the lesson, students should be able to describe the unique characteristic of gymnosperm and state classification of gymnosperm into four phyla. Unique characteristic of gymnosperm. In gymnosperm, the dominant generation is sporophyte. The gametophyte is microscopic and depend on sporophyte for nutrient. Most of gymnosperm have cones in which sporangium develop. Cone consists of closely packed sporophyll. All gymnosperm are heterosporous because they produce two types of spores, megaspore and microspore. Gymnosperm are called seed-bearing plants where the seed is not enclosed by fruit and they do not produce fruit. Gymnosperm has complex and lignified vascular tissue, but for the xylem tissue only have trachea, do not contain vessel element. For phloem, they only contain sieve tube, but do not contain companion cell. Pollination agent for gymnosperm is wind. Water is not needed for sexual reproduction. The non-motile sperm cell reach the egg cell by pollen tube. Classification of gymnosperms. The four phyla of gymnosperm are phylum Coniferophyta or Pinophyta, phylum Cycadophyta, phylum Ginkgophyta, and phylum Gnetophyta. And the last group of kingdom Plantae is angiosperm. At the end of this lesson, students should be able to describe the unique characteristic of angiosperm. Unique characteristic of angiosperm. Angiosperm are seed plant. The seeds are enclosed by fruit. Angiosperm has complex and lignified vascular tissue. Example, their xylem tissue contains tracheids and vessel element, while phloem tissue contains sieve tube and companion cell. Angiosperm are heterosporous, and their dominant generation is sporophyte, where the gametophyte generation is microscopic and depend on sporophyte for nutrient. The flower is a unique angiosperm structure that is specialized for sexual reproduction. The pollination of angiosperm by several agents like insect, animal, and wind. Angiosperm undergo double fertilization, in which one fertilization event produces a zygote and the other produces a triploid cell which then develops into endosperm. Angiosperm do not require water for fertilization. They have pollen tube that help non-motile sperm cells to reach the egg cell. That's all about kingdom Plantae. Let's try to answer the following question in order to enhance your understanding about plant.